Hi, colleagues. I'm excited to share with you my action research plan, the effect of word study and the transference to student writing. I'm going to start by asking the question, why word study? Or maybe ask the question, why not word study? The reasoning behind this for me is that as a teacher, I notice so often how my students do really well on a spelling test on Friday, but then I don't see that transfer into their daily writings, into their independent writing. So that's a big part of the push for me behind this study. We also at our school have an inconsistent methodology through the grade levels. We have a few teachers that teach sight words. We have a few teachers that teach word study. We have a few teachers that teach traditional spelling methods. In traditional spelling methods, there's no differentiation, which leads to a lack of engagement. And spelling is an integral part of a balanced literacy program. And so that, to me, is the value behind this. Into my introduction, I want to start by talking about the purpose. And so the purpose is a word study program more effective than traditional spelling in the transference to student writing? Students in a word study program can benefit from an engaging curriculum. They can benefit from research-based materials that will give them the confidence they need, not just to spell correctly on a spelling test, but also to spell correctly in their writing, as well as to help them decode words through the reading process. Another big purpose is my hope that this will provide school-wide change, that it will put all of us as teachers in our school on the same path as far as spelling instruction, and then of course differentiation for our students. The significance of the study, word study is very much research-based, but there's still some evidence that's needed for teacher buy-in. And those questions that teachers have are, what about the implementation? What about scheduling? How am I going to fit this into my schedule? The application of the program and the teaching strategies. And so if we get those questions answered, the results could be monumental, because that would mean better engagement for our students. They would become better spellers and they would become better writers. So this leads to my research question. What are the effects of word study versus traditional spelling methods on the transference to student writing? And then my hypothesis is that students will develop an ability to spell based on new learning to prior knowledge. There will be an increase in better spelling on tests, as well as the transfer into their writing. So in my review of literature, my theoretical framework is based on a man named Charles Reed. And in 1975, he studied the work of about 30 preschoolers. And through that work, he learned that students invented the spelling of words by arranging letters through phonetic characteristics. And so that caused him to note a sense of logic behind what they were doing. And that introduced the literacy world to this notion of invented spelling. Now, in the late 1970s, Edmund Henderson and his colleagues at the University of Virginia took Reed's findings and came up with this developmental spelling idea, which led to the 5 stages of spelling behavior. And we'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. So as far as early spelling instruction goes, spelling dates back all the way to the 1700s in America. And that's where students were either getting primers shipped to them from England, or in America, they were reprinting them. Spelling was based largely on the memorization of words. And it wasn't until a little while later this notion of patterns and sounds came into play, but they were still, excuse me, they were still, even though they were learning patterns and sounds, they were still getting the same, this idea of a list on Monday, a test on Friday, and memorizing. You're kind of learning it for the test. There was no integration with other subjects, and this phenomenon known as Friday test and Monday miss really came into play because it was noted that students could spell accurately on test on Friday, but then on Monday, it's like they'd never seen the words before. So back to Charles Reed and his idea of invented spelling. in the logic that was applied to spelling behaviors, and Edmund Henderson and how he and his colleagues built on Reed's research and discovered these five developmental stages in spelling. They realized that as students progress, they rely less on sounds and more on strategies as they are exposed to print. And so in these through all of his studies, they came up with this developmental spelling model. And there were five distinct stages known as, or there are, known as preliterate, letter name, within word pattern, syllable juncture, and derivational constancy. And this really challenged traditional spelling methods because it's a huge contrast in what teachers are used to in traditional spelling. And it challenged the notion that children don't learn spelling through memorization and isolation, but they learn it as they build on what they already know, as they're adding new knowledge to what they already know. So word study became validated because of the research that was done. Word study is an active hands-on approach, and it's centered around the individual learner. Due to the nature of word study, teachers are able to provide differentiation. Word study provides logical and predictable patterns in sounds, which leans into the tendency of how our brain works, because our brain seeks out these increasingly complex patterns. And so because of that, that's why word study works so well, is because that's how our brain actually works. And so one huge value and goal of word study is that students are able to take, they're not just learning for a spelling test, but they're able to take that knowledge that they're learning through word study and apply it not only to spelling, but also to the reading and writing process. So there is quite a bit of research on word study, but it is lacking there's not a lot of research on word study and the transfer to writing, to student writing. Now, there is a researcher named Sherry Williams, and she and her various colleagues are current researchers in this area. And so they've done multiple studies on word study, on just word study, but also outside factors and the transference to student writing. But also, how do small groups influence this? How does conferring influence this? What about interactive writing and different strategies like that? And one thing that they did note through several of their articles I read, was that a lot of times the transfer was affected based on their ability. So high students, you didn't see as much transfer because they already knew how to spell so well. The spelling was already there. For low students, it was a little bit harder just because they were already facing some challenges as it was. So they needed more explicit modeling. And so the group they really saw the most progress with was, that middle group that actually could take the knowledge and transfer it to their writing. So I want to move into data collection. So my population at my school, we're a private school, we're middle to high class, we're 82% Caucasian, 8.6 African American, and then smaller numbers when you get into other races. 15% of our families qualify for financial aid, but we don't even offer free or reduced price lunches. We have quite a few in our population that qualify for gifted services in reading and math, and you'll see that 9% qualify for intervention in reading and math. My sampling is non-probabilistic because of my schedule as a reading interventionist. And so I will be working, my treatment group will be first grade students that come to me already for reading intervention. And then I'll have a control group of students from a particular first grade class. And I'll be matching both groups as closely as possible academically. My measures and instruments, I'll be using their independent writing journal to measure the transfer of spelling words that they're learning in class and with me to their writing journal, as well as collecting their weekly spelling scores that they take on in their regular classroom. My timeline, I'll send this out as soon, September 14th is the deadline. I'll be sending that home as soon as possible, getting those consent letters filled out, assent letters as soon as I get those back. The implementation, so day one, I'll be giving a primary spelling inventory to look at their what they already know as spellers. It'll give me some baseline data. And then weeks 1 through 4, I'll implement word study 5 days a week, every week. I'll collect data on that spelling inventory, as well as their weekly journal entries and their weekly spelling scores. And then in data analysis, I'll be analyzing the PSI just for my sampling purposes, and then to evaluate where they are as spellers. I'll also be coding their journal writing into 5 categories, and then weekly measuring their weekly spelling percentages of words they could get correct. So data analysis, I talked a little bit already about the spelling inventory, and I'll use that to analyze their current spelling and make sure my sample groups are similar. I'll have a qualitative method, and that will be, you can see 5 different categories here of coding the weekly spelling in their writing. And then my quantitative method will be descriptive statistics, and that will be the percentages spelled correctly on weekly spelling tests. And finally, we know that word study is effective for spelling. It can be an effective tool for writing, and with the aid of small groups, interactive writing, and strategies, it will help bridge those two together. We know spelling instruction is important. It's an integral part of an English language arts curriculum, and it's an anchor that needs to be implemented properly to connect so many parts of an ELA program. Another important conclusion is that this research will allow for teachers to observe the relevance of a word study program and hopefully realize the benefits that it will provide to a student's independent writing potential. Thank you very much.